Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Forward Life Church online service. We are so glad that you have decided to join us today. We hope that you have been enjoying our services. If you have missed any of our previous services, you can go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel to watch. I will leave you with the scripture. Thanks again for joining. Deuteronomy 31:6 says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you."
Visibility is of utmost importance to us, whether near or far, darkness or light. Our ability to see things clearly is comforting. We take care of our eyes, hoping to get the most out of them. But what happens when reality changes and we can't see our way? What do you do when there's more ambiguity than absolute certainty? When you're unsure of which path to take, sometimes you have to move without clear direction.
Good morning, family. How are y'all doing? Let me be the first to say, well, probably not the first. This is the third day of the new year. Happy New Year to you. I'm glad that you're back with us for 2021, and I'm here to tell you that 2021 is going to be a great year as long as we become a principled people. Listen, I need you to like, I need you to comment, and I need you to share this to your pages. But I want you to understand that this series that we're about to embark upon, Unsee 2020, is not for everybody. This series is just not for everybody. And I know it's shocking to hear a preacher say that. But the truth of the matter is, this series is tailored to meet the needs of people who can admit that we need our vision corrected. Did you hear what I said? This series is tailor-made for people who can admit that we need our vision corrected. I want you to understand that if you can admit that your vision has been off, that at some point last year your vision was off, then this series is for you. This series is for people who have reached the conclusion that in order to see clearly, you have to be willing to see things differently. You got to understand something, that there's one lesson that we must take from 2020 into 2021. And that lesson is perfect vision isn't always characterized by perfect circumstance. Did you hear what I said? Perfect vision isn't always characterized by perfect circumstance. So when we say Unsee 2020, what we're communicating is the need to rethink what clear vision is. You got to understand that the only way we can change what we see is by changing how we think about what we see. Did you hear me? The only way we can change what we see is by changing how we think about what we see. Turn with me to Acts chapter 9 verses 1 through 9. That's Acts chapter 9 verses 1 through 9. And of course I'm reading from the New King James Version of the Bible. And it says in verse 1, listen, "Then Saul, breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he journeyed he came near Damascus. I need you to catch this. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? Then the Lord said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So he, trembling, talking about Saul, so he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? Then the Lord said to him, Arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. And the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. Here it is. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were open, he saw no one. But they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drink. I want to take my thought from verse 9, the A portion of verse 9, where it says, and he was 3 days without sight. He was 3 days without sight. He was 3 days without sight. I want to speak from the subject of blindsided. We're dealing with vision all of the month of January. So I want to speak from today's subject of blindsided. Blindsided. So again, let me reiterate how we're kicking off the year 2021 in an unusual way. But it's necessary because of the unusual year we just experienced. If you're under a certain age, we have to admit that 2020 was a year like no year we had seen before it. It was a year where things were very, very challenging, and that's why I'm championing you to unsee 2020. Yet to unsee 2020 is a huge ask of you. You see, in most cases, to unsee something requires the deletion or erasing of what needs to be unseen. It requires you to delete or erase what needs to be unseen in most cases. However, I don't believe it will be wise to forget a year like 2020. I just don't believe it would be wise for us to forget a year like 2020. And to be honest with you, I don't think we can forget a year like 2020 because 2020 was very unusual. I believe it will serve us well to unsee 2020 by adopting the idea that 20/20, meaning vision, doesn't signify perfect vision. It signifies vision adjustments. Did you hear what I said? Unsee 2020 doesn't mean that you need to erase or delete what you saw in 2020, although it will help you to erase what you saw in 2020. But it's not necessarily what we're going to focus on. What we're going to focus on is unsee 2020 for us means that we need to learn to readjust our vision. Did you hear what I said? We need to learn to readjust our vision. We've been off in our vision. We've had different interpretations of our vision. We've been running with vision and don't even know exactly what has happened. The vision has changed. The vision has shifted. The vision has gone in a different direction, and we're still chasing it as if it's what we originally set out for it to be. And we got to learn how to unsee 2020. We got to learn to understand that just because we have a vision, it doesn't mean that the vision doesn't need to be tweaked every now and then. It doesn't mean that the vision doesn't need to be adjusted every now and then. It doesn't mean that the vision doesn't need to be reconfigured every now and then. Sometimes your vision needs to be adjusted, and I'll prove it to you. In most cases, watch this, visual acuity is only accomplished through corrective measures. I'm going to say that again. In most cases, visual acuity can only be accomplished through corrective measures. You got to understand that. Write that down. For example, in our natural lives, many people can only see clearly if they have glasses, contact lenses, or some type of corrective LASIK type of surgery. And what this tells us is, watch this, ladies and gentlemen, perfect vision and convenience are not synonymous. Did you hear me? Perfect vision and convenience are not synonymous. I know we've been bought into the notion that our vision have to be perfect before it can be executed, that the vision has to be perfect before it can be executed. However, if there's one thing we should have learned from 2020, write this down. If there's one thing we should have learned from 2020, it's a vision doesn't have to be perfect to be perfectly executed. Did you hear what I said? A vision doesn't have to be perfect to be perfectly executed. If there's one thing I've learned, I don't know what you learned. You might have just sat around all year and complained and twiddled your thumbs and didn't learn anything. But there's one thing I learned in 2020 that I'm going to carry over into 2021 and beyond is that a vision doesn't have to be perfect to be perfectly executed. And if we'll be honest, all of us were blindsided in some way or another last year. None of us saw a pandemic coming. None of us saw economic crisis. None of us saw civil unrest. None of us saw social indifference. All of us, to some degree or another, were blindsided by the events of last year. Yet we all had to learn, watch this, how to move with imperfect vision through imperfect circumstances. Watch this, which debunks the necessity of seeing things clearly as a prerequisite for perfectly executed vision. Did you hear what I said? Woo, my God, that was good. Listen, you basically, if you had to go and teach your children at any time last year, if you had to be the teacher, if you had to be the cook, if you had to be the housekeeper, if you had to be the grocery getter, if you had to do all of these different things and function with all of these different hats at any point last year, what you did was debunk the myth of the necessity of clear vision, of being able to clearly understand the necessity of seeing things clearly as a prerequisite for perfectly executed vision. You debunked the myth last year. Seeing things clearly isn't a prerequisite for perfectly executed vision. Sometimes you're not going to be able to see things clearly, but you're still going to have to function to get through to the next day or the next hour or the next week. You're not going to always see things clearly, but just because you can't see things clearly, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to perfectly execute the vision that God has for you. Some of us had the makeshift vision. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what to do. We had to just gain our sight back as we went and trusted God. Did you hear what I said? We just had to gain our sight back as we went forth and trusted God. We were blindsided. We were blindsided. We had to feel our way through trauma. We had to feel our way through discouragement. We had to feel our way through disappointment. We had to feel our way through relational dissonance. Oh God, there were some situations where we had to learn how to deal with feeling our way, with being uncomfortable, with things that made us feel exposed and vulnerable, but we went on anyhow. And I'm here to tell you that in 2021, you're going to go on anyhow. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what it feels like. I don't care how things are breaking down around you. I don't care what's not working in your life. This year you're going to go on anyhow because you've already broken and debunked the myth that seeing things clearly is a prerequisite for being able to execute a vision perfectly. You've already debunked that myth and you are about to be empowered to go on anyhow. I know some things broke down in your life. I know some situations came up in your life that seemed unfair. There were some uncomfortable moments, but you still learn to move on anyhow. Why? Because you learn that vision doesn't always have to be perfect to be perfectly executed. So who can admit, if you can, raise your hand. Ain't nobody else watching you. Can you admit that 2020 exposed some things to you? It helped me to realize that I wasn't as prepared for the unexpected as I thought I was. I was blindsided. I wasn't as prepared to lose some relationships. I wasn't as prepared to not be able to see people. I wasn't as prepared to not have to go online to do ministry and not be able to do it live. I wasn't prepared. I was exposed. But just because I was exposed, it didn't give me the right to not run with the vision. It didn't give me the right to not reconfigure my vision. It didn't give me the right not to shuffle some things around that I needed to shuffle around in order to be able to move to what's next and what God wants to do next. And I'm here to tell you, just because some things were exposed to you, it doesn't give you the right not to have to shuffle some things around to keep moving. See, you're going to have to learn if you got to shuffle your feet a little bit, inch by inch, to keep going. You're going to have to learn to keep going. You're going to have to learn that the vision doesn't have to be perfect in order for me to perfectly execute it. And when I think of a person who is the epitome of being blindsided, I think of Saul. Now, of course, we know him affectionately as Paul, the Apostle Paul. But before he was the Apostle Paul, he was Saul, a Pharisee, who was a tyrant to the Christian church. And the first thing I want us to take notice about Saul is his apoplectic desires towards a place called Damascus. He has an indiscriminate anger, for the Bible says that he was breathing murderous threats against disciples. But not only was he looking to harm men, watch this, he was also looking to do women harm as well. Here it is. He's a merciless man who is indiscriminate in his malice. Get this. Be careful, ladies and gentlemen, of who you're willing to harm to accomplish your objectives. Did you hear what I said? Be careful of who you're willing to harm to accomplish your objectives. I know sometimes we don't understand exactly what we're doing. Sometimes when we're willing to go and do certain things and not consider who we're affecting, not consider who we're harming, not considering what we're asking other people to do when we ask of them certain things. But I'm here to tell you that Saul was a man who knew no discrimination when it came down to who he was willing to do harm to. And you have to be careful who you're willing to hurt, who you're willing to cause pain, who you're willing to cause trouble, who you're willing to cause grief at the expense of gaining your objectives. There are some people, may I say it, who don't care who they step over to get what they want. There are some people who will rob their grandmama. There are some people who will rob their mama. There are some people who will sleep with their best friend's spouse just to get ahead or just to get back at them. There are some people who will sleep their way to the top just to get a position. There are some people who will cross anybody just to make a name for themselves. And I'm here to tell you that if you're the type of person who don't know how to discriminate, if you indiscriminately will do harm to anybody just to get your objective met, it's time to reconfigure your vision. You might be a prime candidate for that. You might be a prime candidate for a person who needs to reconfigure their vision. You might be a prime candidate for a person who needs to reconsider some things. Why? Because the moment that you get to a point where you don't mind crossing certain people, you don't mind stepping on certain people, you don't mind crushing certain people, you don't mind disparaging certain people, you don't mind disavowing certain people just to get what you want, you need to correct your vision. Your vision needs to be corrected. Oh my. Here it is. What I find interesting about Saul's objective and his anger towards Damascus is this. He chose to take his anger out, ladies and gentlemen, don't miss this, on Damascus that didn't appear to be a threat to anybody. Woo! My God, you got to get this. This is why he needed to correct his vision, ladies and gentlemen. This is why he needed to correct his vision. He chose to take his anger out on a place that wasn't truly a threat to anybody. Why do I say this? Because the book of Acts doesn't record how or when Christians were emerging in Damascus. So the question is, why Damascus? Saul, why did you choose Damascus? Why did you set your sight on Damascus, Saul? There doesn't appear to be any indicators in Scripture that Damascus was a threat to Saul's cause. Matter of fact, watch this. Damascus, the word Damascus, the name Damascus of the city only appears in Scripture in 10 other places, and none of them have anything to do with the advancement of Christian discipleship. So, Saul, why did you choose Damascus? I don't understand. Why would you set your sight on a place that doesn't appear to be a threat to you? You got to understand something. This is unusual. And it's almost as if Saul chose Damascus to make a name for himself. Hear me, and hear me good, ladies and gentlemen. I need you to hear me real good. Be careful about allowing your anger to set up your decisions. Did you hear what I said? You've got to be careful about allowing your anger to be the impetus to your decisions. Because what will happen is you will choose to do stuff with no rhyme or reason. There's no biblical reason why Saul chose Damascus. There's no biblical reason. There's no biblical evidence. There's nothing to say that there was anything going on in Damascus that was a threat or a harm to his cause, yet he chose a space that was benign just to make a name for himself. Sometimes anger will make us do some dumb stuff. Sometimes anger will lead us to some bad decisions. Sometimes anger will lead us to aleatory things that are not well thought out or well planned. We go on a whim. We become whimsical in our actions, and if there's no real rhyme or reason why we're doing stuff, we're just doing stuff just to be doing it. We're just doing stuff just because it seems cool. We're just doing stuff just because it seems like it's something we should do. We have no rhyme or reason why we're doing it. We're just going about doing stuff just because it seems like there's something that we should do. But I'm here to tell you that when you make decisions out of anger, when you make decisions that are not intelligent, and Saul was a very intelligent man. He was a man who grew up in Tarsus, and Tarsus at the time was the third leading world for education. It was the third leading place in the world for education. He was a very educated man, yet he made a decision without rhyme or without reason, out of anger, just to make a name for himself. I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that part of the reason some of us experience what we experienced last year is because God had to stop us from doing what we were doing because we chose to do what we were doing. He didn't tell us to do it. He didn't assign us to do it. He didn't appoint us to become friends with that person. He didn't tell us to go into that particular niche or market. He didn't tell us to accept that particular assignment. But because we accepted the assignment on our own, we were left with being blindsided. God had to intervene in a most inconvenient way, because had he allowed us to follow through according to our plans and not his, we would have been out of his will for our lives. God had to intervene. God had to blindside us. Why? Because we made decisions based on our own appetite. We made decisions based on our own desire. We made decisions based on what seemed to be the right thing to do, but it wasn't necessarily God's way for our lives. So he intervened. Saul had a plan, but he was blindsided. Saul had a plan, but he was blindsided. Saul had a plan, but he was blindsided. We had some plans, but we were blindsided. We had some things going on, but we were blindsided. And what we have to understand here is Saul's vision being affected was intentional. And so were yours in 2020. Your vision being affected was intentional. It was exactly what you needed to reconfigure what God was going to do for you next. We've already established that Saul had no problem or cause to go to Damascus. But what we also have to look at is the means by which he planned to execute his plan. Here it is. Text says he went to the high priest and asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, I want you to understand that the way is what they called early Christianity before it became known as Christianity. It first became known as Christianity at Antioch. That's where people were first known to be called Christians. Damascus, watch this, probably had, historians say, 20 to 30 different synagogues there. And when Saul went to the high priest and asked for letters of introduction to those synagogues, what was happening there is the high priest in Jerusalem was literally conferring his authority on Saul. Which means then that Saul, as he entered into the synagogues of Damascus, it was as if the high priest of Jerusalem showed up himself. A couple of things I want you to understand. The point I'm really trying to make here is Saul's plan was dangerous in two ways. At first, watch this, the first way his plan was dangerous is he planned to use religion as a means to trap people. He planned to use religion as a means to trap people. I want you to understand something. Part of the reason why some of us can't really get a vision for ourselves is because we're trapped in religion. I'm going to say that again. Part of the reason why some of us can't get a vision for ourselves is because we're trapped in religion. We're so religious that religion has us bound. Religion has us caught up doing stuff that don't even make sense. We go along with stuff out of religion. We agree with stuff out of religion. We carry on in ways that are just religious. And what Saul was trying to do, the reason why his plan was flawed and his vision was off was because he was going to use religion to trap people. And the last thing people need is more bound and more bondage from religion. Whoo! I'm saying that part of the reason why you need to correct your vision, maybe it comes down to you being too religious. Because anytime religion is used, it's always been used in history as a way to make people or cause them to be bound. And the second reason why Paul's plan, or Saul's plan, I'll keep calling him, I'm going to call him Saul because he's Saul right now, plan was dangerous is because, watch this, in order for Saul to be able to identify with who was of the way and who was not, it would require him to over-scrutinize people, which means that he would be looking at people the wrong way. Did you hear what I said? Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at people the wrong way, our vision becomes prejudiced. Woo! You got to understand something. When you prejudice your vision is no longer any good. When you have a vision that's only targeted to try to divide and separate certain people. See, that's not a vision, that's the vision. Did you hear what I said? Anything that's set up and contrived to separate people people, anything that's set up and contrived to discriminate against people, anything that's set up and contrived to put people in a situation where you're overly scrutinizing them, that's not a vision, that's the vision. Some of us got a bunch of division going, and we're calling it vision. Anything that divides is not a real vision. And can I tell you something and still be your friend? Not only do you need to be careful of what you set your sights on, you must be careful of why you're setting your sights on it. Because a vision can't be contrived for the purpose of disadvantaging certain people. When you look at people who you see who are made in the likeness and image of God, do you see God's likeness? Do you see the imago Dei, the image of God on that person? Do you see a person who has meaning? Do you see a person who has purpose? Or do you only see a person that you can exploit and use? I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you see people and the first thought you have is how you can use them, if you see a person and the first thought you have is how you can take advantage of them, if you see a person and the first thought you have is how you can exploit them, you might need to correct your vision. It's time to unsee 2020. It's time for us to see people the right way, that they are made in the image and the likeness of God, and that God has a purpose for them just like He has one for you. If the only thing you see is how people can serve your purpose and you never see what's on someone else's life, it's time to change your vision. When our intentions are pure, when our intentions are not pure, we become prime candidates to be blindsided. And the text says that Saul came near Damascus, watch this, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. And I find it interesting because the text doesn't allude to whether or not Saul actually saw Damascus. It just says that he got close to Damascus and suddenly. Suddenly, ladies and gentlemen, suggests that something abrupt happened before Saul could set sight on what he conceived in his heart. Did you hear what I said? Something abrupt happened to Saul before Saul could set sight on what he conceived in his heart. This isn't for everybody, but may I suggest to someone that the reason you're experiencing some disruption in your life is because God can't allow you to see some things that you have purposed in your heart, because what you purposed in your heart is not of Him. Did you hear what I said? That's why some of us can't see things like we want to see things. That's why some of us haven't come into contact with things that we want to come into contact with. It's because what we contrived in our heart is not of Him. There were some moments in 2020 when you wanted to go left, but God kept you straight. There were some moments in 2020 where you wanted to tell some people off, but God shut your mouth. There were some moments in 2020 where you wanted to do what you wanted to do, but God stopped you. And the reason He couldn't allow you to arrive at certain places angry is because if you would have arrived there with what you had in your heart, you would have caused irreparable damage not only to other people, but to yourself. Certain levels of anger you can't afford to walk in. Certain levels of frustration you can't afford to demonstrate. There are certain things, oh my God, that you can't afford to get into. Because if you get into those things, not only will you harm other people, you will harm yourself. It's time to correct your vision. Put in the comments, it's time to correct your vision. It's time to correct your vision. And this is why certain blessings elude you. This is why certain relationships elude you. This is why certain doors elude you. This is why certain opportunities elude you. It always comes down to what's in our heart. Let me give you a few things that I got to get out your way because I'm boring you to death. Y'all don't want nothing like this. Y'all want me to stand there and holler in a mic all the time. I'm not doing it. This series is principle oriented. I got to get you. You want a vision or you want a good shout? You tell me which one you want. I got to give you something that's going to make you start planning. You need to hear something that's going to make you start writing some things down. You need to hear something that's going to make you think. You need to hear something that's going to make you want to dream again and believe again. But we've got to change your vision. And that's why 2020 blindsided all of us to correct our vision. I got to give you this and I'm going to get out the way. So Jesus had to give Saul a new vision. And in giving Saul a new vision, Saul had to admit that his past vision was off. And the only path to seeing things clearly, right, watch this, ladies and gentlemen, is through corrective measures. Jesus admired Saul's passion, but he disliked Saul's plan. See, Saul was a man who was passionate. God can always use passion, even if he has to give us a new plan. Sometimes you've got to be willing to lay your plan down in order for God to birth a new plan through the passion you have. It's not your passion that's the problem. It's your plan that's causing your vision problems. Here it is. Here's the steps to correcting your vision. Write these down. Here's the steps to correcting your vision. For starters, you must deal with the tough questions about yourself. You must deal with the tough questions about yourself. Pay attention to this. Jesus asks, watch this, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And you know what Saul did? He couldn't answer that particular question. Did you hear what I said? Jesus asked a specific question. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul couldn't answer that question. He responded to Jesus with the question. His response was, who are you, Lord? Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Write this down. If you're coming up with more questions than answers, it's probably time for you to correct your vision. Did you hear what I said? That was worth the price of admission. If you're coming up with more questions than answers, it's probably time for you to correct your vision. Saul couldn't give Jesus a specific answer to a specific question. Instead, he responded to Jesus' specific question with the question. Because he could only come up with questions because he had no answers. So if you don't have any answers, it's time to correct your vision. Secondly, write this down. If you want to correct your vision, you must be willing to get up after being knocked down. If you want to correct your vision, You must be willing to get up after being knocked down. The text says that when the light shined on Saul, it knocked him to the ground. But after he realized that he had more questions than answered, the Lord told him, arise and go. Here it is. Watch this, ladies and gentlemen. What's interesting to me is when he arose, that's when his eyes opened and he realized that he was unable to see. And I need you to catch this. Although Saul wasn't able to see, the men who was with him came to his assistance. Did you hear what I said? Although Saul wasn't able to see, the men who was with him came to his assistance. But they wouldn't have come to his assistance had he not gotten off the ground. Hear me. Watch this. Don't miss this. If you're going, write this down, if you're going to correct your vision, you're expected to get up after you've been knocked down. If you're going to correct your vision, you're expected to get up after you've been knocked down. But watch this. The Lord told me to tell you that if you get up after you've been knocked down, when you get up, your help will show up. Woo! That's my help right there. That's my shout right there. If you want to correct your vision, you're going to have to learn to get up after you've been knocked down. And the Lord told me to tell you that if you get up, your help will show up. As soon as Saul got up off the ground, he didn't know what was going to come. He didn't know who was around him. He didn't know what was going to come of this situation. But his willingness to get up off the ground brought aid and assistance to him. The men that were with him came and held him up. The men that were with him came and carried him on to where God told him to go. Nobody else. He couldn't see a thing. He couldn't sense a thing. Everything around him was dark. But the moment that he was willing to get up off the ground is the moment that his help showed up. And I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to get up. 2020 knocked you down, but you're going to have to get up. Whew. Circumstances around you knock you down, but you're going to have to get up. Situations were not clear to you, but you're going to have to get up. And the moment you get up is when your help will show up. Here's the last thing I got to give you, and I got to get out the way because I'm boring y'all to death. I can't really give you everything that I picked up from this text. Maybe I'll do a recap sometime this week. Be looking out for it. But if you're going to correct your vision, you're going to need to connect with other visionaries. If you're going to correct your vision, I know you've been blindsided. I know you didn't see any of this coming. I know this situation that you're in right now is something that you didn't lobby to get into. But if you're going to correct your vision, you're going to need to connect with other visionaries. Text says in verses 10 through 12, it says here, now there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And to him the Lord said in a vision, watch this, in a vision, the Lord spoke to a dude named Ananias who was in Damascus and said, arise and go to the street called Straight. There's a whole message on that right there within that, man. Maybe I'll get into it later. I don't have time to get into that right now. But watch this. And inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he is praying, and in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him so that he might receive his sight. Ooh, this is so good. Listen, you got to get this. You got to get this. A dude in Damascus named Ananias has a vision of the Lord telling him to go to Paul, who at the same time is having a vision about him, laying hands on him so that Saul can recover his sight. I'm here to tell you that sometimes if you want to correct your vision, you got to get around other visionaries. You got to get around other people who got a vision. You got to get around other people who are seeing and hearing from God. You can't be around folk who are gossiping. You can't be around folk who are backstabbing. You can't be around folk who are lying. You can't be around folk in all these other nefarious activities. You got to get around somebody who's having a vision. And I decree and I declare that at the time that you are having your vision, at the time you're putting your vision board together, at the time that you are putting your ideas together, at the time that you are laying things out, that somebody is having a vision about you and what you're laying out. And at some point, there's going to be a cosmic connection of your two visions. And when that vision comes together, you're going to get your sight again. God told me to tell you that if you want your vision corrected, get around visionaries. You're going to get your sight again when you get around visionaries. There's something about being around people who got a vision. There's something about being around people who are pregnant with something. There's something about being around people who has heard from God, who has seen something from God. That the moment that when this cosmic connection of two visionaries come together, you're going to get your sight back again. Saul got his sight back again, and he became a new man. But before he could become a new man, he was blindsided. And the only reason he was blindsided was to correct his vision. And I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you're going to unsee 2020, you're going to have to figure out that the vision doesn't have to be perfect to be perfectly executed. Listen, this is the month of January. We're fasting. If you haven't tapped in with us, the fast information is on the screen. Participate with us. We're going to be fasting. We're going to be doing some online prayer. We're going to come together because we want you to be able to change your vision. Come run with some visionaries. Unsee 2020 is just getting started. There's some other things we're going to hit on. This whole series is a series about vision correction. This ain't a series designed to make you shout. This is a series designed to set you straight. Did you hear what I said? This is not a series designed to make you shout. This is a series designed to set you straight. See you next week.